Hi, welcome back. So the next topic which we will be discussing is Spring Boot data. In Spring Boot data, we need to explore one-to-many relationship or many-to-one relationship, whichever. See, here we'll be connecting to the database and the database we'll be using is MySQL. And basically, I have two different entities. One is address and the other is user. And I want one to many relationship between user and address. That means one user can have multiple addresses. Maybe one is permanent address or the other is communication address, the other is for parcel address. Anyhow, here I'm not indicating the type of address. So I'm just specifying that one user can have multiple addresses. That is the requirement. So here I'll not talk much about this application dot properties. The reason is this is as usual the driver, and we changed it in the previous example. Like we had com.mysql.jdbc.driver, so we added .cj basically for MySQL 8 version. Okay, and here the database name is test4, and these are the credentials, and we gave the update for schema, that is the tables. If it is not existing, it will recreate, or if there is any change in the entity classes, like adding a column or removing a column, or adding a field or removing a field, that gets reflected in the underlying DB table. Okay, so that is the purpose of update. And we have already seen what are the different values. Like we had one is create, the other is create and drop, and the other is validate. Okay, these were the different values, but more generally we use update. Okay, right. So we do not specify any relationship here. So the configurations, the DB configurations are same, whether it is one-to-one or one-to-many, many-to-one, or whichever. Now, the point where we need to focus is between the user and address. So we want one-to-many relationship between user and address. So ideally what we do is we go to the user and we specify. Okay, so we are supposed to have a address column here, and we specify at the rate one to many. Okay, but there is a performance hit here, and the Hibernate internally runs multiple queries. So that is the reason it's best to implement one to many as many to one in the opposite direction. So the opposite direction means from the address to the user. Okay, right. So if you go to the address, actually the address has the user, and I'm specifying the relationship as many to one. Okay, fine. So this is the main thing which we need to understand at the rate many to one. So before going further, first let us take a quick look at the user entity class, and then let's come to the address. So I already did the coding offline to save the time. Fine. See, at the rate entity we already know. So this is an entity class. An entity class is basically a POJO class, and which need to be mapped with the underlying DB table. And the DB table name we want to give as user info. Fine. Here, see, generally we just give only at the rate ID. So that means that this is the unique ID or the primary key in the underlying DB table. Well and good. So what is this at the rate generate value? Means whenever you try to insert a record and you do not have any value to this ID, we are asking the database to generate the next value, that is auto increment in MySQL, and it is sequence in Oracle. Okay, right? So that is the purpose of this. So for any reason you do not want that value to be automatically generated and you want to always give it explicitly, you can very much remove this at the rate generated value annotation. Okay, so we are already aware of this at the rate column. So the purpose of it is to specify the column name in the underlying DB table, which is user info. Okay, and I have the getters and setters. Fine. So actually it is one-to-many relationship. So generally what we do is here we will have at the rate one-to-many, and we will try to have a address, set of address or whichever. But due to performance reasons, it's better to implement that using at the rate many to one in the opposite direction. That means from the child to the parent. Okay, all right. See, sorry, I need to go to the address. Fine. See here, as usual, I have the required fields. In addition, I also have the user. But I want to specify multiple things here. What is that multiple thing? One is at the rate many to one. And here the fetch by default is eager and the other is lazy. What do we mean by eager? Eager means very simple. Whenever you are trying to fetch the address, it also tries to fetch the user, and the user object is pre-populated and ready for us. But there may be a bit performance hit. So for whichever reason, I want to go for lazy. Lazy means once you retrieve the address, only when there is a need to retrieve the user, there is a database hit. Okay, so here there is a saving in the memory because you are loading only when it's required. That is the user. You are loading only when it's required, and there is no upfront performance hit, but there can be a performance hit when you are retrieving the user record on demand. Okay, right. So that is about this lazy. Next, see the join column. See the underlying DB table, we have user info, and here we have address as underlying table. See the mapping between the user and the address. Okay, so we are implementing using many to one. So this many side is address. Okay, so ideally the mapping column is available on the many side. So we are telling that the join column is user ID, and that is available in the address DB table. So I just gave a small explanation for this. Enclosing entity, that means address, is the owner of the relationship, and the corresponding table has a foreign key column. That means address DB table has a foreign key column which references to the DB table of the non-owning table, non-owning DB table. That is, non-owning DB table means user in this case. Okay, that is user info DB table. Okay, well and good. So here on delete action cascade, that means when you are trying to delete the user, a specific user, delete all the related records in the address as well. Okay, address DB table. Okay, see what are these three columns? Sorry, these three annotations. See, if you go and see, these annotations are available in the JPA, and this one is available in the Hibernate, and I had already specified you the purpose of it. Okay, so as we see here, so on delete action is here, and the others are available in the JavaX persistence. Okay, fine. So what about this JSON ignore, adjacent property. See, basically these are available in the Jackson. Okay. So what is Jackson? So Jackson is a utility which helps us in marshalling and unmarshalling. Okay, or serializing and deserializing. So what is the meaning of serializing and deserializing? As I already told you, either in the web REST API, see basically whenever you are receiving the data from the client, you receive in the JSON format. The reason is Java object cannot traverse through the network. Okay, unless and until it is RMI. Okay, anyway, we are not using RMI protocol. Fine. So serializing is the process of converting the Java object into the JSON, and deserializing is the reverse process. So these annotations help us in the process of serializing. That means when you have a JSON, when you have a Java object, you want to convert it into a JSON format. The reason is you want to give that to the client. Okay. So where do you give to the client? Through the REST controller. Okay. All right. So you may ask me, in the REST controller, nowhere I'm explicitly using Jackson. No, we are not using it, but implicitly the Spring Boot framework invokes it whenever there is a need to convert the Java object, whenever you are returning the Java object. Okay, fine. So if you go here, and here you are returning the Java object, of course, the list of Java objects. Here you are returning a single address object. So in this process, finally it's converted into the JSON, which further gets returned to the client. Okay, that may be a postman for testing purpose, or it can be an Android application, or let it be a web application which is implemented in Angular, or whichever. Okay, right. So what we are trying to specify here is, we are trying to specify that I do not want the actual user object to get deserialized. Rather, I just want only the ID column of this user object, and we are telling that give the name of that JSON field as user ID. Okay, so that is the whole and sole purpose of these three, right? Okay, so that's about the relationship between the user and address. Okay, and if you go to the user repository, so earlier we were using the CRUD repository, but here I'm using JPA repository. So the difference between CRUD and JPA repository is actually the CRUD repository is the base interface of JPA repository, either directly or indirectly. Okay, that means JPA repository has more functionality compared to the CRUD repository. Okay, so in JPA repository, the add-on functionality is sorting and pagination. Okay, I'll try to give one example for sorting and pagination, maybe in the following sessions. Okay, right. But here, anyhow, there is no difference in our specific case whether we use JPA repository or CRUD repository. The reason is I'm not using any sorting or pagination in this example to keep it simple. Okay, right. So you can very much use CRUD repository. Okay, right. So where is this JPA repository? Means it's available as a part of the Spring framework. Right. See here in address repository, I'll be needing the couple of additional custom methods. Okay, because I need to invoke this from the REST controller. Okay, so that is why I just gave these declarations. As already known, these methods gets the code, the source code for this gets added in the runtime. Okay, so that is the purpose of this tool. Okay, so what is the optional here means? Optional is one of the feature which got added in JDK 8. Okay, so optional means See, when this is being returned, this can be a null or the actual address object. Okay, so this optional facilitates us, okay, to check whether it is null or not. Okay, you can do without optional as well, but using optional it will avoid the null pointer exception. Fine. So here, using optional, it forces us to check whether there is a valid object inside the dot. Okay, right. So that is the purpose of this. Now let us move on to the controller. See, here in the controller, let us assume I have a client wherein I want to get the list of all the users or a specific user, and for that specific user I want to get the addresses associated. Okay, so here, just to keep it simple, I've exposed only couple of REST endpoints, and you can very much add more. Okay, the update and get only a specific user based on the user ID, etc. Okay, so with these I am trying to get all the users. Okay, so if you see, like, I'm trying to return it as a iterable user. Fine, so I'm using the get mapping. I'll get all the users which are available, right? So here what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create the user. Okay? So until now you had already seen at the rate request body, but here what is this additionally means? We are asking the Spring framework, please validate the user framework, sorry, user object before it's being consumed. Okay, so validate means, so all the validation rules you can place it in the entity class. Okay, like for example, you do not want the user name to be null, or you do not want the city to be null, whichever, you can try to add it here in the user. Okay, so you can say that, sorry, not in the controller, I need to go to the entity class and check. Okay, so I can have the right at the rate not null or etc, etc. Okay, but here I didn't place any specific validation rules. Fine, so let's go to the controller, user controller. Okay, so there is a purpose of this REST endpoint. Here, as you see, the REST endpoint URL is same, so there is no confusion. The reason is the HTTP method being used is different. Okay, if you use the same REST endpoint URL, okay, and the same HTTP method, then it will give an exception to you. Fine, so when you try to hit the REST. Okay, so that's about the user REST controller. Now let's check the address REST controller. See, the address REST controller. So here what we are trying to do is we are trying to get all the addresses of a specific user. Okay, so I'm trying to specify the user ID through the path parameter. Okay, so we are getting it as a path variable. Actually, when I was trying to code this, I was getting an exception here. So what I was trying to do is I used user ID here, and here unknowingly I used user hyphen ID. Okay, so it was giving me an exception, like I'm trying to pass the user ID through the URL, but that's not being recognized. So it is telling that user ID is not available in the path parameter. Okay, so why I'm telling is you can try to avoid. So it took me like about 5 minutes to find out the issue and fix it. Okay, so here find by user ID, we added it in the repository and we are returning it here, and finally we are giving it back. Okay, right. So here I am trying to create the address for a specific given user. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is, so by the ID from the user repository, I am trying to get the user. Okay, and in that specific user, okay, so for that given user, I am trying to, okay, set the user, and finally here is the place where I'm saving the address. Okay, So to that address, I need to set the user, right? So I'm setting the user and saving it. Okay. And we actually this returns the optional of address as we have seen in the repository. So I'm trying to get the object of it explicitly and I'm returning. Okay. And further, this is being serialized to the JSON, and finally that's being given to the client. Okay. All right. So here, one point what I would like to focus is, see, if you ask me that, okay, generally the REST controller is there, then that interacts with the service layer, then the service layer interacts with the repository, and the repository interacts with the underlying database. Okay, so that is the general flow. Okay, but to keep it simple here, I'm not using the service layer. Okay, but in the real-time application, you need to use the service layer because you can have some business logic there. Okay, right. So there is a reason instead of using the auto wiring the services here, I'm directly auto wiring the required repositories. Okay, so fine. So once you auto wire, so this specific instance of the bean is being created automatically by the Spring framework and is made available to us. Okay, so that's it about one to many. Okay, before concluding this, let us try to run this and check the output. So what I'll do is instead of creating, I'll try to retrieve it. Okay. Okay. So this is MySQL 5.1, but our database is available in the version 8. Okay. So let me try to go to that corresponding client. Okay. So I think the table name is test4. Let us check it in the application.property. Okay. Right. Yes, it is test4. So let me try to use test4. See, I already have the DB table. The reason is I already executed it a couple of times before giving the demo. Okay, so I have the tables. If you're running it for the first time, then the tables does not exist. It gets created. Okay, right. Okay. So basically we have address users. Please ignore this. We do not need this. Actually, this is for some other application. Okay. Right. So basically, we need to focus on address and user info. And Hibernate sequence is basically automatically created internally by the Hibernate framework. Okay. So let us see which all users are there. Then let us try to query it from the okay, Postman tool. Okay. I'll try to open the Postman tool. If it takes time, I'll try to open directly in the browser. Okay. Right. First, let us see. Select star from user underscore info. Okay, so we gave user info, right? IS capital, so it's in this. Okay, so these are the users which are available. As already told, the mapping column is available on the many side. Okay, so let us see the data in the address. Fine. So here is the place where we have. So okay, so has user one has two different addresses. Okay, if you see two, of course the city and street is same. Okay, but user one has two different addresses. Okay, fine. So let's go and query for the users, all the users first, and then we'll try to query for the all the addresses which belong to the user one through the REST API. Okay, right. So let me try to get the REST API endpoint for the users first. So I need to say slash users. First, I need to run this. Fine. So The application got booted up. Now let's go and query from the, so it is users, and let me use the port number 8080. I didn't use any server dot port there, so it uses the default port 8080. Okay, and it's a get request. So let me try to hit it. Yes, we got the all the users which are available. Okay, so user 2, user 3. Okay, fantastic. So now what we can do is, let us try to query for the addresses of of user 1. Okay, so our URL will be slash user slash 1 slash addresses. Okay, so let us users slash 1 slash addresses. Okay, right. So let me try to, so when I'm trying to send this request, yeah, as you already know, for the get request we will not have the request body. Okay, so you need not send any request body. Okay, so I got the couple of addresses of user one. Okay, so similarly you can try to create, update, and you can try to perform all those. Okay, right. And in that process, if you need any additional custom methods in the repository, you can very much add. Okay, so that's it about one to many relationship or many to one. Okay,